Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. I am so excited today for author and comedian Gary Gulman. We're going to bring Gary out in just a second. But first, thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review, and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. Gary Gulman has been in comedy for over 25 years, and he's established himself as an eminent performer and peerless writer, whom the New York Times said is, quote, finally being recognized as one of the country's strongest comedians. He's made 5 TV specials, including the critically acclaimed new stand-up special from Max, Born on Third Base, and he recently released his memoir, Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 80s, and can also be seen in the 2019 international blockbuster Joker, and the Hulu comedy series Life Beth alongside Amy Schumer. Gary, welcome back into the back room.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
So you're appropriately dressed for my next question, which has nothing to do with comedy, but everything to do with basketball. You're a Boston guy, although you've been living in New York for a bunch of years now. So obviously your Celtics are having a fantastic year. Are you still a Celtics fan, or did you switch over to the very exciting Knicks now that you're a New Yorker?
No, I do enjoy the Knicks. I root for them except when they play the Celtics, but I love the Celtics since, I guess, 1979-80 season, which was Larry Bird's rookie year. Mm-hmm. So it was just the perfect time to fall in love with basketball and such an exciting team and franchise.
Well, they're killing it this year, but the Patriots?
Yeah, they look great.
Patriots, that's a whole other... How does that feel after all these years of, like, invincibility?
Couldn't give a fuck.
Well, you and me both, brother.
Yeah, I stopped following the Patriots when Bill Belichick sent a letter congratulating President Donald Trump. It just... it killed me.
Yeah.
I no longer like Bobby Orr, Doug Flutie, all these people who I grew up looking up to, and they supported this just monster. So
right. I mean, the same for New York. Like we get Aaron Rodgers, and it's like, oh, but he's a dick. It's like
I know. He's out of his mind.
Out of his mind. Yeah. And now I think he's being sued by Jimmy Kimmel for.
Oh yeah. I love that.
Which is awesome.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah.
But, the whole Patriots thing opens up this whole... It kind of reinforces my belief that it's always about the players,
Yes.
Like, you take Gronk and Brady away from Belichick, and what do you got? You got this season, right? Like
you maybe... you have this season, exactly. Exactly. I found an analogy that I like in that Larry David was Jerry Seinfeld's Tom Brady.
Right. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, that just showing them both without each other,
right,
has shown who was the real genius and innovator.
Yeah, so, well, like you could take the Bulls back in the 90s and have me as the head coach, and they probably still would have played exactly the same.
I know. And yet, yeah, and Phil Jackson is considered a genius and a guru, and he anytime he coached anybody that didn't have 2 generational talents at least.
Right.
With the Bulls, they had 3 at times, and I mean, Michael Jordan. As much as I love Larry Bird, Michael Jordan's the greatest player I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Larry Bird, he's a different kind of greatest player.
Yeah, yeah. He was fun.
Yeah. So my daughter and I, she's 19 years old, almost 20 actually, in a couple of weeks. And the other night, I said to her, because like a lot of teenagers, especially coming out of COVID, whatever, she deals with her own anxiety and depression. I said, I'm interviewing Gary on Monday, and we should watch The Great Depression together. And we did, and she loved it.
Wow.
And I had seen it before a while ago, but when we got to the toilet paper on top of the...
Well, yeah.
We both looked at each other and like, we need some therapy because neither one of us can fucking put the toilet paper on the rod. Like, what is that about? And of course, you go into a whole explanation of that. That's a sign, right?
Yeah, it really is. Those things just they're so simple when you're feeling good, and when you're feeling lousy, even in levels of low grade depression, those things feel like Sisyphean tasks.
Well, you say that it is the one task that you can literally do just
Yeah.
sitting on the toilet. And that's
Yeah.
too much.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, but it's just and I set about compiling just a list of those things when I was putting together that special, and it was really fun to sort of get some redemption over those things that you're kind of, or I was kind of embarrassed by, and hear the laughter, which is of recognition that I wasn't the only person who was doing this, and there were people who would consider themselves functional, and yet when you take a look at it, it is a reason to maybe take a look at how you're feeling.
Yeah, well, I think you've probably helped quite a lot of people because since then, she and I both are very cognizant of when we start to put it on top of the holder, we're like, no, 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 we have to. Let's take the extra 22 seconds and put it in the proper place. So you've been a busy guy this autumn. Congratulations. You got so
Yes.
much going on. You're a very hardworking comedian and author. And I came across, I found this funny. I came across a Forbes interview that you did.
Oh yeah.
And it was like totally financial. Now, you have an accounting and finance background, so I
Yeah.
see there's some connectivity. But I loved when one of the questions was about your revenue streams. Like, I was wondering what's in your head in that moment. Like, well, this is a different kind of interview.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was different from any other interview, and I've always found it just I resent commerce and finance, even though I studied it in college because I had been convinced that that was the only area that a person could find a job, and so ever since then, when I've been intersected with commerce or finance, I've bristled, but I felt like these were things that I had never shared with anybody or considered, and so and also there's this feeling when you're being interviewed that you should be a good partner in the interview and answer these questions, but if another comedian asked me about revenue streams or any kind of commerce or production or anything like that, I would tell them to focus on what's important and what matters. But I wanted to be a good interview subject, and also I figured that people were going there for information. And my wife had told me that it was a very helpful magazine for young women who were trying to learn about finance and investing and things like that, that she had gotten information from it herself, and so I felt like I was providing some kind of service. And then the woman who asked the question was so nice that I answered. But yeah, it really threw me off because I at least want to only concentrate on my jokes and my shows, but I do have to kind of consider what I'm going to leave my wife.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
when I
personally,
pass on.
personally, when it comes to Gary Gulman, I find all the comedy stuff boring. I was really fascinated that listening to you talk about SEP IRAs like that.
Yeah, but I
Can we talk?
I,
Can we do this whole interview about finance? Are you okay with
yeah,
that?
it was only my wife, because I was telling her on the way to the interview. I said I don't want to do this. I resent any kind of the talk about money or income, and she told me that she had read a lot of interesting articles, and I thought, all right, I should be of service. I think that's become a sort of a subtext of what I've wanted to do ever since I got better from my depression, that I wanted to be of some kind of service to humanity.
Well, on that note, my first question is about irrevocable trusts. I'm curious. No, I'm kidding. Um, let's talk about your new Max special. The first question I want to ask you, though, as a guy who spent most of my career in marketing, how are you feeling about the new brand, Max versus HBO? Like, what's your think on that?
I'm.
And not give a
I
shit.
mean, I loved HBO Max because it collected all these things that I loved, which is sort of there's The Wire, there's Sopranos, and there's Batman, all on the same site. And then there are a lot of specials on there and documentaries that my friend Judd Apatow and Mike Bonfiglio directed, like about Gary Shandling and George Carlin. So it's this great site for what I'm into, and I also have gotten no love or interest from Netflix, and HBO also produced and funded my last special. So I have loyalty and allegiance with. So I have nothing but positive things to say. Like, they have treated my wife and I so well. They've flown us to places for promotion, and it's just been a delightful partnership, I guess. And just do little things like there's a woman named Nina Rosenstein who's a producer and an administrator there. I don't know if that's the proper word, but she will send me very useful gifts frequently. A thing that helped me to fold my laundry easier, and a hot water maker, and so these are things that I've never gotten from any other business involvement. So I'm really grateful for the generosity they've given to me and my family. But I don't know the outside opinion on the brand, because most people are not working for them. But I will say that working with and for them has been nothing but pleasant.
I had a similar experience when I directed my documentary about Adrian. The people there were amazing. Right. And just personally, that I've always loved that HBO brand. But
yes.
And so Conan O'Brien is the EP on your special.
Yeah.
And you guys have a long-term relationship, or was that something that is only recent?
Well, no, I mean, I guess our relationship started in around, I want to say 2012 or 2013, when I made an appearance, and then that led to more appearances. And the one appearance I did, where I did the abbreviating of the states, I mean, that changed my career, and therefore my life. It just made it a lot easier to sell tickets. And so the relationship had been really one-sided in that I would give him 5 minutes of jokes, and he would make me much more famous than I had any right to be. And then my manager showed him this special that I had funded on my own, and then he and some of his producers edited the footage and really made it. They really added value. I was so impressed with how it came out, and so they gave me a nice check and put their name on it, which really helps, because Conan's name is much more recognizable than mine. And then I got to do his podcast, and we had a great time. So I wouldn't say that we text back and forth while watching Celtics games, but I would say we're friendly. I consider a friend more somebody who I would have dinner last minute, but maybe someday.
No, professionally, obviously, it's a great relationship. How long does it take to put a special like that together, from concept to execution?
Oh, geez. I mean, I probably could have filmed that special a year after the pandemic. I would say 2 years is a good amount of time to let jokes and stories percolate. And then this coming special, my next special, which is based on a tour I'm doing now, I think I started writing it in May, and I could shoot it tomorrow. It just came together much quicker than anything has come together before. And it's I'd read something years ago that Maya Angelou said, that you can't run out of creativity. The more you create, the more you have, and or something like that. She said it much more poetically, but I've found that to be so true, and that I used to sort of hoard my creativity and think, oh, the next idea is going to be so long that I better really work on this idea, and it creates a sort of a mindset of need or want, and this new approach where I wrote a book and wrote a new special in the same 3 years. It seems to be the answer to my fears of running out of jokes. Is just keep going, and don't be so precious with everything you write and conceive of, that it's partly a confidence thing.
Mm-hmm. So the special is called Born on Third Base, which most of us usually associate with the full phrase "born on third base," thinks he hit a triple. You obviously belong to that very small class of Jews called poor. So what was the thinking behind, perhaps other than the obvious, of calling it Born on Third Base? Because you clearly weren't born on third base.
Yeah, but that's a really good question, and because I have a really good answer to it. I conceived of the title before I put together the set. I always loved that expression. He was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, and it's always a person who was given everything, and they walk around like they were self-made or so hardworking, and the Trump family are great examples of that, and before that, George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, I conceived of this idea that I was going to also take the label, in that I felt I was born on third base, even though I grew up, we're on welfare, but I was a white male born in the 1970s in Massachusetts, where if you could put together $2,000, you could have a full year of tuition at a state university, and so there was a much better safety net, and there were so many more advantages for white men than there were for any other category of Americans, and so I thought that would eventually, I really believed I could make it funny, that whole idea. And I was never able to, but I really liked the title, and I like titles that don't give away anything. And I also like to watch things or listen to music and think, oh man, they never mentioned the title. Why did they call it that? And so I was able to do that. But and also it gives people like you with curiosity an opportunity for me to fill them in. So I like it.
Mm-hmm. And I got to say, mommy look, brilliant. I mean, that
Thank
is
you.
so funny, but so smart in terms of getting into the psyche of comics and performers who are looking for that affirmation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the self-realization or the self-awareness that over the years through therapy, especially my therapist since 2006 or 2007, that certain ideas and hundreds of sessions before I even put it all together, but I was realizing that a lot of what was going on stage with my relationship with the audience and certain, for instance, I am very sensitive to any kind of heckling or disturbance in the audience, and it became clear over the years that I was sort of, it was replaying these dinners and get-togethers with my family where my brothers or somebody else would interrupt me or criticize me or stifle joy or reprimand me or criticize me, and so I realized, and I say it in this special, I had to tell myself the audience is not your family. These people, for the most part, are rooting for you. and they're on your side. They're not trying to trip you up. But I realized that also that this thing, one of the things I get from comedy is this attention that I didn't get growing up, and that I clearly needed and desired and felt I deserved. And so I've done a lot of work at being able to get more attention than I was given.
Mm-hmm. Well, my favorite line of the special, and you just referred to it, is when your therapist reminds you that the audience is not your family, because the audience is actually rooting for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of analyzed and parsed that idea, and one thing, and maybe this is being too generous, but I think that sometimes a family is looking out for you to try and see you not get hurt, and so they try to hold you back so that you won't risk anything and feel the pain of being rejected or losing or things like that. But it also, the other side of that is they're telling you implicitly that they don't believe in you.
Right. One of the things that I love about your comedy, and I think is what a lot of people are really drawn to, is that you do have a base. You'd say it's librarians and middle-aged Jewish women, but it's really you're not doing typical setup punchline. You're really a master at long form storytelling, and it's also very cerebral, right? In your special, you mention A Tale of Two Cities, Kafka, Paramecium. You bring up Eugene V. Debs, for fuck's sake. I mean, like these are incredible. And this is one reason I always loved Dennis Miller back in the day, putting aside his politics, is because his references were so intellectually oriented, and if you kind of half understood them, you found it hilarious, you know? Yeah. And so you do that a lot. And then at the end, when you referred to in medias res, I was like, wow. First, I actually had to go and put subtitles on, because I've never heard that term before, because I thought you were saying in immediate stress. And I was like, well, that makes sense given all of what he's talking about. But people respond to that. And I think that's what sets you apart from a lot of the comics out there today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's partially intentional in that I wanted to set myself apart from the other comedians so that I could get more work and do more comedy, because that was always my aim, was just to get more shows. And I found that one of the easier ways to stand out from the other comedians was to just write to a level just a little bit above where everybody else was writing. So if everybody else was writing at a 7th grade level, I would write at a 9th or 10th grade level. And then very fortunately, the type of people who like that type of humor came to see me, and so I was able to do these things. And I guess the other part of it is I always thought I'm not exceptionally intelligent or I don't have a genius IQ or anything like that. So I think most people are pretty smart and will know this. And if they don't, the people who do get it will really appreciate it. So if not everybody gets it, that's fine. And I always liked those jokes that were either on The Simpsons or Dennis Miller, that I would think, oh my gosh, that feels like that was just for me. And when you extrapolate the just for me into an audience of thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever you're getting when you have a TV broadcast, it becomes significant, and it's enough to sell a couple hundred seats in a number of different cities.
And setting that higher standard for yourself is really smart. I mean, you know, in the past when he was coming up, people would talk about Jerry Seinfeld. He doesn't curse. He's very clean. And you look at how far he's gone. I mean, he's got a whole building for his Porsches, and you can't even put a toaster on the counter.
But the thing with Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno, who were guys that I admired coming up, was they didn't swear because of some sort of of parochial or puritanical reasons. It was kind of a marketing decision, and I feel like that was part of the reason I didn't swear was because coming up in Boston, the other comedians swore so much that I could stand out by not swearing. But the other thing is that as I've been doing it now over 30 years, it would make it too easy.
Right.
It's just to put an F swear or other words in there that will make the audience laugh. It provides no challenge. And while I don't really covet enormous challenges, I do like some challenge. So I can't imagine how easy it would be if I could take some jokes that didn't work and throw the F swear or something like that in there. It would be like dunking all the time, which you can imagine it's hard to imagine for short people, but like us who can't dunk all the time, but it would get tiresome if you were dunking over everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting what you're saying because I love a lot of comics dating back like to the Richard Pryor days. Like he's still to me the funniest guy ever, and he was as blue as they come, but he used profanity in such a unique, deep, meaningful way. It wasn't gratuitous at all. No. And there's a lot of comics that do take that easy route. Yeah. But when I hear someone like you talk about ish versus esque, like that's my ultimate kind of comedy where I can go, wow, that's really smart because it's not cheap and it's not easy.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, there's this limitation in comedy, which is that just about every thing you can think of has already been made into a joke. And so when you have these small opportunities to do something that maybe hasn't been joked about before, whether it's the suffix esque or the suffix fold or something like that, and my serotonin and dopamine goes for a long run when I'm able to find those things, because it's also tied to my survival instinct, which is I feel like I need to get better as a comedian in order to keep doing this thing that I've been in love with since I was 4 or 5 years old.
Mm-hmm. But you don't talk about politics in your routine, and
not explicitly, but I think it's clear in every joke who I would vote for.
Right. Well, that is true. But is that a really conscious choice not to delve into those waters, especially with how emotionally charged the landscape is today?
It is conscious, but it is, and you can help me out as a friend because it's also a little bit delusional. But I consciously avoid topical, which is always political, is always so topical. I consciously avoid topical because I have this delusion that the jokes will somehow survive after I'm gone. And I mean, jokes are the sandcastles of art, really. It's few and far between. Pryor is one, Bob Newhart is one, that I can listen to albums from 40, 50 years ago and still think, oh, that's brilliant. Carlin, Bill Hicks.
Right.
But there are few and far between, and it's just so rare. So it's delusional, but I'm a great admirer of Don Quixote. I feel we should spend at least a small percentage of our lives tilting at some windmills just in case.
So what you're saying essentially is that 30, 40, 50 years from now, you don't think people are going to remember you for your Vivek Ramaswamy jokes?
Exactly.
Good point. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I love listening to old Bill Hicks, but I notice that I'm not as interested in hearing his takes on Billy Ray Cyrus as I am just his takes on life and philosophy. It's really interesting that those things really hold up, his mm-hmm. meaning of life type things, and his, what would you call it, sort of his existentialism mm-hmm. that always shine through. And so I I try to steer my act more towards things that are quote unquote evergreen, but
Right,
it's
right.
again it's a bit of a delusion.
Well, it's like Pryor's talking about the differences between black and white people. Like, it's timeless, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, what you're doing is also a very smart business decision. It's like Michael Jordan saying, why am I not political? Because half of the country, which is Republican, buys sneakers, right? So, like, why consciously piss off potentially half your audience, right? And so,
Potentially, but I would be willing to bet that 95% of my audience has identical political
yeah,
opinions to
that's a,
me.
yeah,
I wouldn't have a problem with doing it if I felt like. The other thing is, I can't imagine that jokes can change your mind about who you're going to vote for. I love the expression, sometimes not taking a side is taking a side. So I don't want people to think that I'm a fence sitter,
mm-hmm.
but I do make it clear that I am in favor of reducing the suffering of poor and marginalized and oppressed peoples.
Mm-hmm. Well, we opened up earlier that you referenced the Trump family when it came to being born on third base and thinking you hit a triple. So it's out there now. Your whole political,
yeah.
You've just bared your political soul. I'm not going to give it away, obviously, because I don't do spoilers. But I will say the ending of your special, to me, is perhaps one of the greatest examples of callback ever. So I'm just going to float that out there for the people listening to this. You talk a lot about Jews, and I'm sitting here with three Jews, and myself included, in the studio. And actually, the three of us just launched a podcast called Jew 2, which is us three sitting around with both a non-Jewish and a Jewish guest, perhaps each week, talking about religion, the cultural differences, cultural similarities, et cetera, et cetera. It's really funny. We just finished one with Mocha Joe from Curb Your Enthusiasm, Severio Guerra. It's hilarious. In fact, you should do it sometime. But I wanted to ask you: do you consider yourself a Jewish comic?
Do I?
Yeah, not you're a comedian and you're Jewish, but if someone was to like say, "Oh, the great Jewish comics of the day," like, do you see yourself that way, even though you may not talk about Jews and being Jewish all the time in your bits, but you do infuse a lot of your culture and heritage into your comedy?
I think if you took every Jewish person on the planet, were somehow able to put in to them where they fall on the spectrum of how observant they are, how culturally aware of their Jewishness, what they believe, how much schooling they had, and then divided by all those Jewish people, I think I would be the average Jewish experience. And so I not only consider myself a Jewish comic, I think I'm one of the great examples of the Jewish comic, in that there are some Jewish comics who never mention that they're Jewish. And there are some Jewish comics, Jackie Mason being sort of the epitome of it. There's not a second where he's not either explicitly or implicitly announcing, I am a Jew. And I think initially, it was a way to set myself apart from the other comedians in Boston who were not talking about being Jewish. They were mostly Irish people or Italian people. And if they talked about anything, they would talk about that aspect of their life. So I was able to be the only Jewish guy on a lot of shows. And I also felt this need to express how I Jewed, if you will, how I was going about it, and I say it explicitly in the special that I'm a member of a group that is known for having an attribute that some would consider positive, that we are very good business people and that we're financially secure, and yet I grew up and we were poor, and I'm sure the average Jewish person is probably the average American in terms of wealth, probably middle class, like most of the people. But the big attention is put on incredibly rich Jewish people as as is the intention put on a lot of minorities. The most well-known of them are generally well off. Anyhow, I again, I feel like, and this is probably a feeling amongst a lot of Jewish people, especially of my generation and my father's generation, where you had to be kind of a spokesperson and an example of your people so that people would think well of your entire race, which I think is a terrible thing that is put upon us, and nobody should have to be an example for their people so that other people don't discriminate against them. But I always felt like I was being judged by more than just my own individual contributions, but also how I represented my people. And I knew growing up how proud Jewish people were of people who achieved and who were also Jewish. So I felt sort of an obligation. So that is the longest answer to a question. Do you think you are a Jewish
that was
Yes,
so
100%.
Jewy, that answer. Get to the point.
Yeah.
So talk about the book. It's an interesting story behind the name, Misfit.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Rush, and there was a song that they did. I think it came out in 1982, but I was exposed to it later than that, and it really resonated. And it's called Subdivisions, and it's about growing up in the suburbs. And there's a sentence where he says, "Nowhere else is the dreamer or the misfit so alone." And it just, I mean, it really was. It's just such an efficient sentence and says so much. And I felt so connected to that. And so the word misfit, and just you see if you read the book that in every situation I didn't really fit. I went to Hebrew school amongst people that were similar to me, and I didn't connect there. And I went to a Jewish summer camp, and I didn't connect there. And then I played basketball, and I mean, just for the fact that I was into Rush, you're not going to get a lot of people into Rush on a basketball team. And then football, where I was a really sensitive, shy kid trying to excel, and in some cases excelling in this sport that is really for brutes, Philistines, and Cretans.
Did you ever see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction of Rush?
Yes.
That was epic. And also
Yeah.
Geddy Lee, Jewish.
Yes.
Who knew?
Gershon Eliezer Weinrib. I just I listened to his memoir, which is extraordinary. I think it helps if you're a Rush fan, but it's just so well written, and he's got such a great ear, and he's such a sharp, kind, thoughtful person that it was wonderful. It was one of my favorite books last year.
And you open the book with a quote from Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Why was Mr. Rogers such an influence in your life?
I think for me, Mr. Rogers is a kind of a secular saint. I think I'm actually, it's a funny issue to ask, because I'm listening to a book, a biography of him called The Good Neighbor, and it talks about his education in the seminary, and he was a Presbyterian minister, and everybody who encountered him said that they felt like this is what Jesus would have been like if he had lived in modern times, that he would have been this generous and this kind and this thoughtful and looked out for the children and the poor. And I just, he was such an enormous part of my life, along with Sesame Street growing up. Single moms had this one piece of assistance growing up, and we didn't have a VCR. The VCR wasn't available yet, and babysitters and childcare was something very unusual or very expensive. But for a block of at least 2 hours, you had Sesame Street followed by Mr. Rogers and the Electric Company, and most kids could sit transfixed by that. And Mr. Rogers was just such an important person in my life, and not a day goes by where I don't think of something that he had said or a way that he had made me feel. And I thought this one quote that I had come across while reading another another book about him that was actually published by the same company that it talked about. I can't remember the exact words, but about how we spend our whole lives considering the events of our childhood, and when he said, "Oh, that's a normal thing to do," it made me feel really good, and it also is sort of the subtext of the project, which is that I analyzed my kindergarten through 12th grade memories, and for whatever reason, those memories are I've been told remarkable that I have a memory from that is unusual for people to have about that period of time in their lives. So it was definitely going to be a Fred Rogers quote to start the book, and there were at least a half a dozen that would have been equally helpful, but I thought that one was ideal.
And you structure the book. Each chapter is a specific grade: first grade, second grade, third grade. And speaking of your memory, which is pretty amazing that you go back that far, I wanted to know, like, why did you start there? Why not like the womb or just early toddler years?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I think is an advantage if you're going to memorize things is having a box to put the memory in. So when you start school, you can think, oh, this happened in kindergarten, and that also gives you the year, and based on the holidays and things like that, you can kind of figure out the time. So I think that's what's missing as we get older. So if you say, what happened when you were 43? I don't really remember, but I remember being 5 because I was in kindergarten, and I can remember going on the first day of school and picking up this kid who I would actually become friends with again in when we played basketball together in high school 10 years later when I was in 10th grade. So it just, the thing that is really helpful in memorizing things is just having a box to put the different components in.
And in high school, it's clear you have the dubious distinction of having been both a sports star and a virgin, which not a lot of kids pull off in high school.
Yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Oh, I mean, it's just, it can't be talked about, I don't think, without talking about the mental illness aspect of it, where your brain, your depression, your anxiety is telling you you're ugly, you're not talented, everybody's laughing at you, and you're lucky to have the 2 or 3 friends you do have, because if they knew the real you, they would run away and think you were a complete loser. So it's not surprising when you add the mental illness component of it, especially where it's not diagnosed, where I had nobody to share it with. I think there's a different version of me in a universe where I was in therapy or comfortable with that, or had a parent or a friend or brother who I could tell what I was really thinking, and also who could interpret that and give me some insight, because there weren't that many people back then, even if I had understood what was going on.
I want to end on something I heard you say, which is, it's never been a better time to be a stand-up comedian and mentally ill.
Oh, yeah.
Because I find that hilarious, but I also find it really poignant, because it speaks to your honesty about your condition and how you've dealt with it and still deal with it. And I think it was just a really honest thing to hear you say.
Oh, well, thank you. I do like to repeat that, because it does provide some hope in that. And it's interesting, because I will get 99 people who say that made me feel a little bit better, and then there will be one person who will point out how hard it is to afford therapy and how the drugs have a lot of side effects. And I understand that, and I feel sorry for that person. But I will say, if you had to choose a time in history when you would have this thing that is by no means easily cured or treated, you would pick now.
Mhm.
I mean, somebody in my condition many years ago would not have the different treatments available to them, and there wouldn't be the understanding within the community and at work, and there wouldn't be the Americans with Disabilities Act, which makes it you can't fire somebody just for being mentally ill. So it's just a great time. And it was probably a better time to be a stand-up comedian when you could go on the Johnny Carson show and supposedly be famous the next day or something. But there were only like, and I'm exaggerating, there were only like 9 comedians at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it is much easier to do this thing as much as not as much as you want, but more frequently than ever before. There are more outlets, there are more opportunities, and you're probably not going to become rich and famous in either time period, but you'll get to do more comedy now than you would have, say, in 1968.
Yeah, I think it's very clear about what you said. I mean, it's certainly the awareness on mental illness and mental health is way more prevalent today than it ever was. And, try pitching HBO a special called The Great Depression 20 years ago, right? So it's a great time to be a comedian, and if you happen to have issues like that you're dealing with. So, Gary, this was great. Thanks for coming on again. You're on fire, so keep going.
I feel really good. Thank you so much, Andy. It was great reconnecting, and let's do Jew 2 sometime this year.
You got it.
Okay.
Take care, Gary.
Peace. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by critically-acclaimed. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.